She even went as far as starving Aile of food and prohibiting her from sleeping until it was 2 in the morning. Aile was in shock at the cruelty of someone she had once considered a dear friend, but she made up her mind to endure. Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful young woman named Aile. Aile was not just any woman. She was a wealthy young woman who lived in a very quiet village up the hill. Aile was extremely wealthy, owning acres of farmland and numerous markets across the region. Aile loved to live a private life and often spent her days overseeing her businesses and managing her farmers. Despite Ajele's wealth, she had no friends and kept to herself. Several women in the village tried to be friends with her, but Ajele was not interested in any form of friendship. One evening, whilst Ajele was returning home from her farmland, she heard a loud cry for help coming from a hut not too far away. Curious as to why someone was screaming for help, Ajele approached the hut and met a woman who was sitting outside her hut crying. The woman had just been battered by her wicked husband and pushed out of the house to sleep outside, and Ajele, on sighting her, had compassion for her. Her name was Eno, and she had been married to a violent husband for so many years. Eno had lost 3 pregnancies due to her husband's violence and was unable to leave the marriage because of huge debts that her father owed her husband, which he was unable to pay. Eno was from a very poor family and was forced to marry her husband Usman as a way of offsetting the debt that her father owed to Usman. Her family had no other option as Usman insisted on marrying Eno as a form of repayment for the debt that he was owed. That was how Eno was forced to marry Usman, who turned her into a punching bag. For years, Eno endured her husband's beatings, hoping that he would change, but as the years went by, his beatings grew worse, putting Eno in harm's way. Eno could not leave the marriage because of her family, as she knew they had no money to repay the debt. Ajele, on seeing how battered Eno was, took her to her home and nursed her wounds. She provided Eno with some food as well as a room to lay her head because it was already getting dark, and Eno was so grateful to Ajele for being kind to a complete stranger. She pleaded with Ajele to save her from the hands of her evil husband, and Ajele, seeing the pain in her eyes, decided to confront her husband Usman the next morning. She offered him a deal he could not refuse as she repaid the debt that he was owed, as well as a huge interest for him to permanently leave Eno and relinquish any claims over her, and Usman, without thinking twice, agreed to her offer. Eno was so grateful to Ajele for saving her and offered to do whatever possible to repay Ajele for her kindness. Eno asked if she could work for Ajele, and Ajele agreed and gave her a job in one of her factories. She worked so hard, and this impressed Ajele, who decided to give her a huge sum of money to start up her own business. Eno cried tears of joy as she never expected such a huge amount of money from her friend. Through the guidance of Ajele, Eno set up her business successfully and began to make so much money. Ajele was so proud of Eno and all she was able to accomplish. Her heart was gladdened to see a woman who was once at the mercy of her wicked husband flourish despite all odds. Their friendship waxed stronger as all the other women in the village envied their friendship and the success they had been able to achieve. After several years, Ajele's business began to struggle. Some of her workers connived with her competitors to destroy her business, and soon Ajele's businesses were run to the ground. Ajele was left penniless and she was clueless on what to do. She approached her friend Eno to help her with some money to put herself back together, but Eno looked her in the eyes and said that she had no money to give. This was so shocking to Ajele, who knew that Eno had more than enough at the time. Eno's refusal to help struck Ajele like a cold wind on a sunny afternoon as she knelt there, confused and unsure of what to do. Eno then made a proposal to Ajele that shocked her to her bone marrow. She told Ajele to work as her maid for a year, saying that after 1 year, she would give Ajele a huge sum of money which she could use to get herself back on track. Ajele froze in shock as she could not believe that Eno wanted her to work as her maid. She could not believe that a woman who she had once helped had so quickly forgotten the hand that lifted her from despair. Ajele's heart was so heavy as she had sold all that she had, including her houses, to salvage her failing business, but still it wasn't enough. She had no monies left and was left with no other option than to accept her friend's offer to be a maid in her home. She saw no wrong in serving and believed that someday she would rise again, so Ajele revealed to Eno that she would be her maid for 1 year. Ajele began to work immediately, and Eno, who she thought was her friend, showed her a part of her that she never knew existed. She would yell angrily at Ajele and call her all sorts of condescending names. She even went as far as starving Ajele of food and prohibiting her from sleeping until it was 2 in the morning. Ajele was in shock at the cruelty of someone she had once considered a dear friend, but she made up her mind to endure. As Ajele served in Eno's house, her humility touched the hearts of the other servants who secretly admired her strength and shared what little they had with her. Word of Eno's harsh treatment began to spread around the village, and the people who had once envied Eno now saw her in a different light. The more they heard of Eno's cruelty, the more their hearts turned away from her, taking their business and their respect with them. They all decided to boycott her business as they could not understand how one could be so wicked as to bite the finger that once fed her. Not long afterwards, Eno's business began to feel the weight of the villagers' decision. Despite this, Eno still refused to learn her lesson. One early morning, Eno informed Ajele that she was expecting a very important visitor. She ordered Ajele to clean the whole house and prepare some delicious meals for her visitor. Ajele set out to work as Eno remained in her room preparing for the arrival of her visitor. After several hours, her visitor arrived and Eno was so pleased to see him. His name was Kojo and he was a very rich businessman who picked an interest in Eno a few months ago when she visited a neighboring village for business. They got along so well and he promised to pay her a visit in her village. Eno was so happy to see Kojo in her home as she looked forward to marrying him. She yelled at Ajele to bring some drinks for her visitor, and when Ajele stepped her foot in the living room, her eyes locked with that of Kojo as she opened her mouth in shock. "Ajele," Kojo said as his voice shook in excitement. "What are you doing here? And why are you serving as a maid?" he said as he looked at her in confusion. Ajele, lost for words, narrated how her business crumbled, forcing her to serve as a maid to make some money, and Kojo shook his head in disappointment as he told Ajele that he had been looking for her for so many years. What had happened was that many years ago, Kojo worked for Ajele's father, who was the richest man in their village. He was a gold merchant and the biggest in the whole region. His competitors, threatened by his success, poisoned him, killing Ajele's mother and only sister in the process. Ajele was the only member of her family alive. Scared that the people who killed her father might come after her too. Ajele ran away from her village with some of her father's gold, which she used to establish herself in the new village that she settled. For years, Kojo looked for Ajele but could not find her. Her father, a few months before his demise, called Kojo aside and gave him a box of gold, saying that if anything ever happened to him, Kojo should hand the gold over to his family. Kojo, being his most trusted ally, kept the gold in a safe place. When he heard of the death of Ajele's family, he came in search of Ajele, but she was long gone. For all these years, Kojo had kept the gold safe, hoping to find Ajele. When Ajele heard this, tears poured down her eyes as she could not believe how life was about to smile on her again. Eno sat there shocked, unable to utter a word. Her chances of ever marrying Kojo ended before it even started, as Kojo got to find out how she treated a woman who once helped her at her lowest. Kojo, without wasting any time, returned to his village and brought the gold that Ajele's father had entrusted in his care. He gave it all to Ajele, who was so grateful to him for his honesty. She offered him some of the gold, but Kojo refused to be rewarded, saying that Ajele should use the gold to establish herself once again. Ajele was so grateful to Kojo as she rebuilt her life and became even richer than she was before. Eno, however, struggled with her business, which finally crumbled, returning her back to square one. The horrible things that she did to Ajele made it impossible for her to approach Ajele for help. So, she left the village in shame and no one ever heard from her again. That was how Ajele became extremely wealthy again and built several businesses in the village, which thrived and prospered. Ajele used her wealth to impact the lives of those around her, including the maids that served with her at Eno's home, who shared the little they had with her. And on the other hand, lived all her life in poverty as she spent her life regretting all her wicked deeds. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should not bite the finger that fed us. Never reward one's kindness to you with wickedness, because life is not certain. Treat people with kindness, regardless of their social status, as you never know what will happen in the future. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.